Comes to Activision, Xbox just keeps on winning. You thought you were going to go a week and not have a video on this channel about Microsoft's biggest acquisition in their history and the biggest acquisition in gaming history ever? Well, you were wrong, because that's what we're here to talk about today. Now, I've been sitting on like a couple different pieces of news because I was kind of waiting for things to settle down. And, well, the headlines came out that Microsoft got its 37th country to approve the Xbox Activision acquisition. And now on the cover, that sounds amazingly awesome. Like Microsoft is just rolling right through, right? They got the EU, they got 37 countries. And okay, when you dig this apart, it's not as quite impressive as the click-friendly headlines make it seem. And yeah. So first off, 27 of the 37 countries are in the EU. So by the EU last week saying, look, here's our rubber red stamp of approval on this deal, they got 27 countries. Now, it's not technically incorrect to say that they got 37 countries because that's how many countries make up the EU minus the UK and the CMA. But yes, so they do have 37 countries. Now, the big one that actually triggered this headline is actually China signed off on the deal as well. So that's another big market for Microsoft, right? Obviously, if China says, nah, you can't buy Call of Duty, you can't do that whole thing, then that would be a pretty big problem for Microsoft because China is a massive market and one that Microsoft hopes to continue to grow in, and they sell a lot of software in China. And so that was a very big deal for Microsoft to get China to sign off on that. Obviously, the only one that matters now really is the FTC. We'll talk about the CMA here in a second, but the FTC in the US is the big market that Microsoft still needs to win over to get all this deal done and get the $70 billion, which is just such a large amount of money, out of their bank account. Now, also speaking of this Call of Duty acquisition Activision thing, Microsoft has actually filed to appeal the deal here in the UK against the CMA. So this is Microsoft just honestly doing the thing that we all knew that they were going to do. Microsoft's like, look, we're not just going to roll over and be like, the CMA said we can't do this, mostly because it still seems like a lot of experts agree that Microsoft will be able to get this through. And even internally in the UK, some of the prime ministers and then the government bodies were actually putting pressure on to like, let's get this through. And so again, we don't need to go back to the deal where the CMA put out some tweets that were really weird and not really backing up the case. But either way, it all pivots around the cloud gaming in the CMA. And so maybe there will be more remedies that come out, and then like everybody will feel like a winner after this all gets done. Now, that is not the only win that Microsoft has notched up recently. So Microsoft also had another lawsuit in the United States where a group of gamers said Microsoft should not be allowed to buy Activision because it's gonna hurt us. And yeah, it doesn't really matter. The court threw out, actually a federal judge threw out the lawsuit because the gamers were saying Microsoft would make Call of Duty exclusive more expensive and that it would just be bad for gaming in general. So you got basically three wins that really land conveniently in the Microsoft side. You got the 37 countries, which is still a great headline. Like, that is a brilliant headline for Microsoft to go to market with, which they have. I mean, that's kind of where this came from. And then notching up the other stuff. Now, that's not only gaming news that is making really thunderous headlines. While not explicitly related to Microsoft here, this came out overnight that the Embracer Group, who owns, they're like a conglomerate. They own a bunch of different games. They own a bunch of different rights to different IP and all that. They had a $2 billion partnership for a game with an unknown game development company fall through overnight. The reason why I bring this up is everybody's trying to figure out, who was this with? Was this with Xbox? Was this with Sony? Was this with EA? Who were they doing? I mean, the first title that came up was like, oh, they lost the deal for Perfect Dark. But who? Here's the challenge. Here's the genuine challenge with this. A $2 billion partnership is not a single game, right? It is not the next version of Call of Duty, Activision, I believe at one point stated it's around $300 million. So a $2 billion deal it's like multiple things here. My guess, and this is straight guessing, is that there had to have been some sort of IP related play here and that they were going to be building games based on an IP and that this was going to be a long deal. I don't know. Again, is this like a Harry Potter thing? Because that could be up in that category. But again, they were expecting to make $2 billion, so it's not necessarily them paying out. We don't really know. It looked like they were going to land a big deal to build a whole bunch of IP, and that has clearly fallen through. So everybody's racing to figure out what this $2 billion partnership was. Was it with Xbox? I don't really know. The reason why I hesitate here is why would Microsoft be willing, like they're already on the hook for spending nearly $70 billion news and another $2 billion to another company. Not saying it's not them, but it just doesn't feel like it might be Microsoft. So focusing back here, it looks like Microsoft is obviously taking big hurdles again to get through this acquisition. We'll wait and see what happens because China is a big market. Obviously, the EU getting signed off is a big deal, but they have to get through the US. And here's the downside to this scenario is I don't think they're going to get through the US in any quick, clean fashion. It's going to take months, and they will definitely be missing their June 30th deadline. And the reason why I bring that up is that reminder, Microsoft is potentially on the hook for several $billions. I believe it's $3 billion owed to Activision if they don't close by June 30th. Now, Activision has the ability to extend the deadline, which by all means, I absolutely think they will. Because again, $70 billion is on the line. That's way higher than their actual valuation currently. And Microsoft will be paying quite a bit of a premium to actually lock all that up. So the question becomes is, what is the new arrangement going to be? When do they think they're actually going to get it closed? Microsoft didn't do any updates on its guidance in its last round of earnings, which I was actually expecting them to do, to be like, hey, June 30th isn't going to happen. Unless they are hearing otherwise, like internally, then maybe it is. Maybe it is going to happen. But with China behind them, everybody else, now Microsoft can continue to focus here on the US, which will be interesting to see kind of how that plays out, because this is such a massive acquisition for Microsoft. You got to think about what happens if this actually does fall through. So if it does fall through, Microsoft pays the $3 billion or whatever the separation fee, then what are they going to do? Are they going to continue to try to invest in Xbox? I absolutely think that they would. They'd be crazy to give up on what they've got. But they're definitely going to be at a bit of a disadvantage, only because if you think about it from Microsoft's perspective, they've been sitting, like they're not trying to do other gaming acquisitions right now. It'd be crazy to line up other companies to acquire when you're trying to spend $70 billion on Activision. So they've been in this holding pattern about future investments in new IP, but I shouldn't say new IP, but alternative IP at the end of the day, assuming that this will probably go through. If it doesn't go through, what is the actual fallout from this? So Microsoft's in that interesting position. It's like, okay, if we get Activision, we will have a massive boost to our catalog and all of our problems are solved. Hakuna Matata, right, in the Xbox war. If it doesn't come through, then Microsoft quickly has to figure out, make sure that one, their pipeline is actually still being filled up by their current studios. And we all know what's been happening there. Obviously, Starfield is a big title. They've got, the next probably 6 to 12 months. We've got Avowed out there. There's other titles. We'll learn more here in early June about what their plans are. But if they don't get it, then it's going to kind of put things in a little bit more of a shaky ground. So we'll see. Microsoft has, I shouldn't say plenty of time. They've got plenty of dollars to figure it out if they suddenly find themselves with an extra $67 billion dues to go figure out these content strategy. But time will tell. Time will be the true arbiter. And as always, my friends, that is the news. So make sure to keep it subscribed here because on the BS on this channel is me.